Hey everyone, we all know that writing a book takes a long time and that sometimes revision work takes even longer. And that's okay, it's not a race. But for some of you, you may be at the late stages of revision work and you're feeling like you've been doing this for too long, like you've been doing this for years. Some of us have. I get it. In my experience, this is not an uncommon situation. As a book coach and developmental editor, what I often find is that the writers who get stuck in this revision process longer than they would like are often the smartest and most conscientious writers that I know. So today, what I want to talk about are the obstacles that we sometimes put in front of ourselves to avoid finishing the book and how we can get over those obstacles. So let's dive right in. So if you are a smart and introspective writer, one of the things that makes your writing so strong is probably the fact that you see possibilities everywhere. You've got lots of ideas, you have lots of interest and enthusiasm about different craft elements that you can use, and you're always experimenting and trying new things. And that is fantastic. I don't want to discourage anyone from playing with their story. But what can start to happen is we become overwhelmed by all the possibilities. Let me show you what I mean. And again, this is for writers who are at the late stages of revision work, not the very beginning. So imagine you have this concept. You're writing about a woman who finds her estranged brother has come home. Instead of simply revising that concept and figuring out where the heart of its emotionality lies, have you ever tried to play with some of these questions? Should the story alternate timelines now? Should the brother narrate some chapters? Hey, would second person point of view be more intimate? Maybe forgiveness isn't the theme after all. What if the mom became the emotional center? What if the novel actually started here? If you could relate to the questions on that last slide, I applaud you. They're very writerly questions. They're excellent questions, in fact. And we definitely want to dig into this line of inquiry at some point in the revision stage, or even earlier when we're drafting our stories. But that endless reconsideration that feels like rigor can actually be the thing preventing us from finishing writing our book. Let me know if this is familiar. Spending 6 weeks restructuring Act One, changing the POV repeatedly, rewriting the opening, researching different structure methods, but avoiding something really fundamental and key that every single reader is going to be looking for. Something like deciding what your protagonist wants. We can, in our enthusiasm and our desire to do the best we can really start to muddy the waters and overcomplicate things. And meanwhile, be avoiding looking at some really fundamental questions and answering those. Another situation that I often see with the smartest of the writers that I work with is confusing complexity with depth. And again, this is kind of points to a really cool thing about you if you're this kind of writer. It means that you really love language and you love symbolism and you love all the different literary elements that we have in our toolbox. But sometimes that complexity can really start to be a hindrance, especially late in the game when we're using it as a way to avoid finishing our stories. So let me show you what I mean. Imagine a nonlinear novel with shifting narrators, fragmented chronology, philosophical monologues, and dense symbolism. That can be really fun, and it's a lot of fun to write. Oftentimes, it's a lot of fun to read. But at a certain point, we need to stop and ask ourselves, is this starting to weigh my story down? Is this starting to keep me from finishing what I set out to do? Often, when writers start to spend too much time thinking about craft, thinking about all of these different elements they can play with, readers are still left wondering, what's changed for this character emotionally? Why does this story matter? Why should I care about it? That is when complexity sort of obscures the more important fundamentals of your fundamental parts of your story versus a story that's very deep but tells a relatively simple story. For example, a son cleaning out his dead father's garage while discovering evidence his father planned to leave the family years earlier. It's a simple premise. There's not anything really difficult to decipher there. But there are huge emotional implications. So much can be done with this plot without over making it overly complicated. And so it's important when we're starting to get bogged down in too much technique, too much craft, to ask yourself, am I confusing complexity and depth? I wonder if you can relate to this next one. Do you ever resist simplicity? I see this with smart writers all the time. They worry, well, if I make this too emotionally direct, if I say what I mean, am I going to frustrate the reader? Are they going to feel like I'm hitting them over the head with this idea? And so they'll have this tendency to obscure motivations and emotional turns and thematic clarity. And instead of readers having this elevated experience or this more intellectual, rigorous experience that the writer intended, they're just feeling distanced and far away from the story. They're not gaining anything, and they are being pulled. There is a distance that exists because of this kind of technique. Sometimes, not always, there are no always in writing, but sometimes simplicity is really the best way to drive home a very profound and meaningful point. Smart writers can also get in their own way by being excellent, excellent rationalizers. I see this sometimes when I work with writers who have workshopped their story with beta readers or in a class, and they come to me and they say, I just think they didn't get it. And they will talk about, I don't think my readers understood the symbolism or the historical parallels or the pacing. And there's a long list of really well thought out rationalizations that justify to our minds, well, they just didn't get our story. It's not my story, it's them. And that is fine. Sometimes we really need to put a line in the sand and say, this is vital to my story. This is the story I want to tell, and I'm going to tell it that way. And if your goal is to tell that story the way that you know that story to be true, and that is your only goal, that is fine. And you should keep moving forward. But if your goal is to connect with a reader, if your goal is to publish and sell your book, then you do need to be in conversation with the reader. And if the reader is not understanding it, even if your symbolism does make perfect sense, even if those historical parallels are brilliant, if it's not being conveyed in a way that readers can connect with, you're going to have an unsatisfying experience. And so sometimes, even if our rationale makes perfect sense, we have to step back from that and just say, okay, this is working for me, but it's not working for anyone else. What do I need to do? So going into those beta reads with an open mind, it can be really hard when you know what you want to say and it's not being understood. So often, our writing lives become part of our identity. We identify as writers. And so, when we put our books out there to be critiqued by beta readers, by friends, by editors, we are in a very vulnerable position because it no longer feels like these people are critiquing our pages. It can feel like they're critiquing us. And so, as a result, sometimes we go to great lengths to avoid that possibility by simply never finishing our books. And it's really important to understand when we are putting off the completion of our book in order to put off hearing that critique of our pages. Once we do kind of bolster that courage to send our books out to others, it's vital to remember that you are not your book. Your book is a really important part of your life. It's something you've put lots of yourself into, but it is not you. And so no matter how it lands with readers, that's not a reflection of your value as a writer or as a person. But this can be really hard um, to keep in mind when we're going through the process. And so I think it's important to remember that we do sometimes go to great lengths to avoid finishing our story in order to avoid that vulnerable spot. Refinement can feel a lot safer than resolution. And so, as a result, sometimes we are spending lots and lots and lots of time adjusting sentences, refining metaphors, doing that really granular kind of line editing level of work. Because, like we just touched upon, submitting that manuscript could mean rejection, evaluation, and just a finality that we don't really know what to do with. So, here are some key takeaways I hope you walk away with. The first thing is to really notice when revision work is serving to protect you rather than to improve your story. Touch base with those feelings, really dig into them, journal about them if it's helpful. And and I think sometimes understanding and naming what you're doing there can make it easier to let go of that story and finally put it in someone else's hands. I would encourage you to let your story become smaller. At a certain point, when you are in the very late stages of revision, your job is to make the story smaller, not to constantly expand it. This is one book, and I've run into this with writers all the time who it's almost as if we forget that this isn't the only book we're going to write. We can do this again if we finally finish this darn thing. So it's not a time where you have to play with every literary element that you ever caught your attention. And it's not a time where you need to share every single bit of wisdom that you have or every single address every single theme that's important to you. This story has a beginning and a middle and an end, and there will be more stories where you can put more of your great stuff into. I would invite you to avoid the temptation of thinking, if I make this choice and I don't make this choice, somehow my story will be lesser. It's just a different way to tell your story. Telling your story in first person point of view and third person point of view will both probably wind up being compelling decisions. It's a matter of choosing one, the one that you feel most excited about, and committing to it. That's it. And you can go write another story in a different point of view next time. Another tip I tell the writers I work with is finish before you feel finished. I think as writers, we sort of want to have that defining moment when we're positively certain we've done everything right. Remember, there's going to be editors looking at your story. You'll probably share it with friends and family. There will be many more sets of eyes on this story before it's finally finished. So if you wait for that moment when you feel 100% certainty, that moment may never come. It's much better to let go of that story when you still have some energy left for it, when you still do feel curious about it. See what kind of feedback comes back, and then you'll have the energy to go and reapproach when the time is right. And finally, I would like to say that thoughtful writers often think the solution to their revision work is to think more. And sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes you just have to take that leap of faith and know that you've done the work and it's ready to share with others. I wish you the best of luck with this. Thank you so much for sticking around. As a thank you, I'd like to give you this gift. Write a Fabulous First Page. It's my video series and workbook to help you make sure that your first pages are agent or reader ready. This is perfect if you are just getting started or if you're in the midst of revision. There's something in here to help. And finally, I want to tell you about my writing circle. Every Wednesday at 3 o'clock Eastern, the writers in my community get together with me for an hour of writing. It is a super casual, laid back experience. We hop on a Zoom call and we just write together. You can write with your camera on or off. It doesn't matter, whatever's most comfortable for you. So please join us sometime. If you would like more information about how you can join us, you can grab that link in the comments section and sign up. It's completely free, and we would just love to see you there.